Picture a man running through a marketplace at dawn, lantern in hand, screaming into the faces of strangers. "I see God! I see God!" He cries, and the crowd, filled with atheists and skeptics, laughs at him. Has God lost his way like a child? Did he emigrate? Is he hiding? The madman smashes his lantern to the ground and tells them the truth they're not ready to hear. God is dead, and we have killed him. This isn't a scene from a horror film. It's from Friedrich Nietzsche's 1882 work, The Gay Science, and it's one of the most misunderstood declarations in the history of philosophy. Because when Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't celebrating. He was issuing a warning, a prophecy about what happens when the sacred collapses, when the foundations of meaning crumble, when nothing remains to anchor our sense of purpose in the universe. And here we are, over a century later, living in the aftermath of that death, surrounded by wealth, technology, and endless distraction, yet plagued by an epidemic of meaninglessness that seeps into every corner of modern life. So what did Nietzsche actually mean? He wasn't making a simple atheist declaration that God doesn't exist. The crowd he describes, after all, are already atheists. They already don't believe. What Nietzsche was pointing to was something far more profound and far more terrifying. The belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, and everything that was built upon this faith, propped up by it, grown into it, including the whole European morality, is bound to collapse. This is the death of God, not a theological claim, but a cultural diagnosis. For over 1,000 years, Christianity provided Western civilization with its entire framework for understanding reality. It answered the big questions. Why are we here? What should we do? What is good and evil? What happens when we die? These weren't just religious questions. They were the scaffolding upon which entire societies were built, laws were written, art was created, lives were lived. And now, after the Enlightenment, after the rise of science and rationalism, that scaffolding was dissolving. Europe no longer needed God as the source for all morality, value, or order in the universe. Philosophy and science were capable of doing that. This increasing secularization of thought led Nietzsche to realize that humanity had killed God with the scientific revolution, with the desire to better understand the world through reason rather than revelation. And here's what makes this so dangerous. When you remove God, you don't just remove a theological concept. You remove the entire foundation for meaning itself. Because God wasn't just a being you prayed to. God was the ultimate answer to the question, why does anything matter? Without God, suddenly the universe is just matter in motion. Morality becomes subjective preference. Your life becomes a brief flicker of consciousness in an indifferent cosmos that will forget you the moment you're gone. When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. By breaking one main concept out of Christianity, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. Nothing necessary remains in one's hands, and this is what the crowd in the marketplace didn't understand. They thought they could keep their moral framework while discarding its foundation. They thought they could stay comfortable in their humanism, their belief in progress, their faith in science, without realizing these were all still shadows of the God they claimed to have abandoned. God is dead in the hearts and minds of modern men, killed by an indifference that was itself directly related to a pronounced cultural shift away from faith and towards rationalism and science. The madman tells them he has come too early. They're not ready to understand what they've done, but eventually they will. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. And so do the consequences of killing God. What exactly did the sacred provide? What are we losing when God dies? On the surface, it's easy to dismiss religion as superstition, as outdated mythology that held humanity back. But that misses the point entirely. The dilemma that people faced was that the scientific findings were difficult to deny or ignore, yet they seemed to render human existence meaningless. If there is no God, no immortality, nothing at all special about human life, then what possible meaning can be found? The sacred provided something that no amount of scientific progress can replace. It provided a sense of cosmic significance. The feeling that your life mattered not just to you or to other people, but to the universe itself. That your choices carried weight beyond this brief existence. That suffering wasn't senseless but had purpose. That love and beauty and truth were not accidents, but reflections of something eternal. And perhaps most importantly, the sacred provided what we might call existential security. A sense that despite all the chaos and cruelty of the world, there was an underlying order, a divine plan, a reason for it all. You could endure suffering because it was meaningful. You could face death because it wasn't the end. You could trust in moral absolutes because they were written into the fabric of reality itself, not just convenient social conventions. Consumption becomes consumerism when an individual purchases and displays these signs to others with the unconscious intent of procuring social recognition that grounds his or her personal significance in a community, and thereby transcends his or her individual mortality. This religious function, this answer to the existential problem of meaning, doesn't disappear just because we stop believing in God. The need remains, the void remains, and into that void, something will rush to fill it. Nietzsche worries that if we fail to vanquish and decisively replace the shadow of values derived from God, we risk our culture slipping into a deep nihilism. The death of God means there is no going back. We either find a new mechanism for value creation, or we will eventually descend into a world where recognizing our values are ultimately foundationless and meaningless. We will become apathetic and cynical, even despairing. This is the prophecy. This is the warning the Madman tried to deliver, and we are living in its fulfillment. Fast forward to today. Walk through any major city in the Western world and you'll see the symptoms everywhere. Despite all the wealth, benefits, and comforts produced by modern industrial countries, there is still a sense of malaise that something is lacking. It can be surprising to see people with unfathomable riches who yet struggle with depression, anxiety, alcoholism, substance abuse, and similar problems. We have more material abundance than any civilization in history. More entertainment, more choices, more freedom. And yet we're more depressed, more anxious, more medicated than ever before. Why? Because abundance doesn't answer the question, what is it all for? Technology doesn't tell you what your life means. Freedom without purpose is just the liberty to drift in an endless sea of options, none of them ultimately mattering more than any other. By the late 20th century, nihilism had assumed two different forms. In one form, nihilist is used to characterize the postmodern person, a dehumanized conformist, alienated, indifferent, and baffled, directing psychological energy into hedonistic narcissism or into a deep resentment that often explodes in violence. Look around. How many people do you know who seem to live only for the next pleasure, the next distraction, the next purchase, the next weekend? How many are consumed by cynicism, by irony, by a bitter contempt for anything earnest or sincere? This is nihilism wearing a smile. It's the philosophy that nothing really matters dressed up in the clothes of sophistication and worldliness. And it's killing us slowly. The meaning crisis manifests in countless ways. To a significant degree, this crisis is predicated on a widespread sense that life is meaningless. Thanks to our myriad technologies, we know ourselves and others inside out. The problem is not that we're out of touch with our diets, heart rates, sleep, and finances. It's that these details lack a deeper sense of significance. We track everything about ourselves. We quantify our steps, our calories, our sleep quality, our productivity. We know more data about our lives than any generation in history, and yet we feel emptier. Because data isn't meaning. Information isn't purpose. And all the self-optimization in the world doesn't answer the fundamental question, why am I here? Young people feel this most acutely. It can also be surprising to see young people with comfortable lives lacking nothing yet who reject everything and have an attitude of indifference towards both their present and their future. They inherit a world where all the old stories have been deconstructed, all the grand narratives dismissed as oppressive, all absolute truths labeled as dangerous. They're told they can be anything, do anything, believe anything. But what they're not told is why any of it matters. And so they drift, paralyzed by infinite choice, haunted by the sense that it's all ultimately pointless. We tried to replace God. We really did. We threw ourselves into new religions, new ideologies that promised to fill the void. Consumerism expanded rapidly in the 1970s and 1980s as competing sources of meaning in Western cultures. Ideologies of progress, careerism, nationalism, and churches built on social convention lost their plausibility and effectiveness. First came the political religions. Communism promised a workers' paradise, a utopia built on rational principles. Nationalism offered collective identity and glory. Various forms of utopianism suggested we could engineer our way to a perfect society. And they all failed spectacularly, often leaving mountains of corpses in their wake. Because when human beings try to create heaven on earth, they tend to create hell instead. Then came the softer substitutes. Consumerism became, in many ways, the implicit religion of the modern West. Consumerism can be idolatrous, in that it directs the person away from God and replaces the person's Christian belief and life with the consumption of goods, thus functioning as an ersatz religion. Shop your way to salvation. Find yourself through your purchases. Express your identity through brands. The mall becomes the cathedral, Black Friday the holy day, and the new iPhone the communion. We even speak in religious terms. That restaurant is divine. This product is heavenly. Shopping is my therapy. But here's the cruel trick. According to the logic of consumerism, there is never any meaning to be had through consumerism. Consumerism challenges the teleological nature of human desire. It's a religion that promises transcendence, but delivers only the next purchase, the next disappointment, the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. We tried making idols of our careers, our relationships, our personal growth. We told ourselves that meaning comes from within, that we create our own purpose, that all we need is to follow our passion and be authentic. And for some people, for a while, this works. They find satisfaction in their work, meaning in their relationships, purpose in their personal projects. But strip away the comfortable circumstances, introduce suffering or loss or failure, and the whole edifice collapses. Because meaning you create for yourself is fragile. It depends on conditions you can't control. It dies with you. Existential nihilism can lead to existential crises, which are periods of intense self-examination and questioning about the meaning and purpose of life. These crises can be emotionally distressing and may contribute to mental health challenges, such as depression, anxiety, and feelings of emptiness or hopelessness. The psychological toll of living in a post-sacred world is immense. With radical and individualistic generations being raised, nothing is more effective than to point out how existential nihilism does not bring happiness, meaning, or prosperity. We see it in the suicide rates, the addiction epidemics, the rise in anxiety disorders and depression. We see it in the political polarization, where people cling to ideologies with religious fervor because they need something, anything to believe in absolutely. We see it in the culture wars, where every issue becomes existential because, without any shared sense of the sacred, every disagreement threatens the fragile meaning structures we've cobbled together. And perhaps most tragically, we see it in the quiet desperation of ordinary people who go through the motions of life feeling that something essential is missing but unable to name what it is. They check off all the boxes. Good job, nice house, healthy relationships, and still feel empty. Because the divine is not merely a theological concept. It encompasses all that belongs to consciousness, all that integrates and enables experiences such as contemplation, beauty, love, passion, and joy. The absence of the divine in this broader sense signifies the erosion of value in all that is vital and meaningful in our relationship with the world. So where does this leave us? Are we doomed to nihilism? To meaninglessness? To a world where nothing is sacred and everything is permitted? Nietzsche didn't think so. He believed that we could overcome nihilism, but only by facing it directly, by acknowledging the magnitude of what we've lost, and then engaging in what he called a revaluation of all values. We have to create new meaning, not by pretending the old gods are still alive, but by becoming what he called the Bermensch, individuals who have the courage to forge their own values in a godless world. Jean-Paul Sartre asserted that humans have no inborn essence defining who they are or what their purpose is. He argued that they can overcome this lack of predefined meaning through freedom, proposing that people make their lives meaningful by inventing themselves and their values. This is one path forward. The existentialist answer: embrace the freedom that comes with meaninglessness. Take radical responsibility for your choices. Create yourself and your values through your actions. Albert Camus explored the psychological paradox that arises from the inherent drive to seek meaning in an objectively meaningless world. He termed this condition the absurd and advocated for a defiant stance of rebellion against the lack of meaning. Perhaps the answer isn't to find one grand replacement for God, but to recognize that meaning might be more fragmented, more local, more provisional than we'd like. That it comes from our relationships, our projects, our commitments to things beyond ourselves. Not because the universe cares, but because we choose to care. Not because there's an objective purpose written in the stars, but because we create purpose through how we live, or perhaps. And this is the possibility that haunts all of secular modernity. Perhaps Nietzsche was wrong. Perhaps meaning really does require something transcendent, something beyond ourselves, something that doesn't die with us. Perhaps the death of God really does lead inevitably to nihilism. No matter how hard we try to create meaning from nothing, what's certain is this: we can't go back. The sacred world of our ancestors, where heaven and earth were intimately connected, where every action carried cosmic significance, where God's presence was felt in every moment, that world is gone. We live in the aftermath, in the long shadow of God's death. And the question we face, individually and collectively, is not whether we believe in God. It's whether we can find a way to live with meaning, with purpose, with something approaching the sacred, in a world where God is dead, or whether we'll drift deeper into the void, filling it with increasingly desperate substitutes, until we forget there was ever anything worth believing in at all. The madman was right. We weren't ready to hear his message. And more than a century later, we're still grappling with what it means to live in a world where nothing is sacred anymore. The death of God isn't just a historical event. It's the defining crisis of our age. And how we respond to it will determine not just the future of Western civilization, but the future of what it means to be human in a universe that offers no easy answers.